Good evening, everyone. Please be seated. Without further ado, I will please call the Secretary to please read the minutes of the last meeting.
I propose the minutes be taken as read.
Seconded. It has been proposed and seconded that the minutes of the last meeting be taken as read. Is this your will?
No!
Is it further your will that I sign these minutes as a true and accurate representation of the event?
Aye.
Very good. Are there any questions of officers? Are there any private matters? Very good. There being none, we will move forward on to the main event of tonight, which is to hear from Mr. Roger Stone. Mr. Stone has worked for Presidents Nixon, Reagan and George H.W. Bush, as well as dozens of candidates since the 70s. He's a personal friend of President Trump and has been so for many years, and was one of Mr. Trump's first campaign hires in 2015. He's also a New York Times best-selling author and has donated some very, very nice gifts for us tonight, and has appeared repeatedly on the news on news networks including Fox News, Breitbart, CNN, CNNBC, MSNBC, and has written op-eds for the New York Times. And only last year he was the subject of the Netflix documentary Get Us Roger Stone. So without further ado, Mr. Stone, the floor is yours.
You know, the only thing worse in politics than being wrong is being boring. I promise you, tonight will not be boring. We have come here at a propitious time because we have the backdrop of events in Washington to talk about tonight. But my principal focus is on the improbable election of Donald Trump, what it means, how it came to pass, and the future that it perhaps has in store for us. I noticed that well, let me say, first of all, I appreciate the invitation of the Durham Union Society to be with you. I'm most grateful for your invitation. I'm a little disappointed with the turnout. Thank you all for being here. I'm a veteran of 10 national United States presidential campaigns, beginning with Richard Nixon, who was my mentor, through Governor Ronald Reagan, who I served in 3 campaigns, 1976, 1980, and 1984. I did come in at the end of the Bush campaign of 1988 at the request of my friends Roger Ailes and Lee Atwater to run their California effort. In the end, George Bush defeated Governor Michael Dukakis in California by 1 point. I worked for that great American patriot, Senator Bob Dole, who I had served in the U.S. Senate as a staff assistant. And then in 1988, I began urging Donald Trump to run for president. I urged him to run again in 2000. Some may have forgotten, but there was a brief period in the 1988 election in which Ross Perot, a billionaire American independent, briefly led both the Republicans and the Democrats and appeared to be headed for the White House before his candidacy imploded basically at his own hand, but proving at the time to me that it was at least possible on paper for an independent to be elected president of the United States. Donald Trump wisely, I think, passed on that opportunity. And then in 2012, I wanted him to run again. I wanted him to challenge Mitt Romney, who I believed would be a weak nominee. And of course, I was delighted when he decided to run in 2016, winning the most improbable victory in American political history, and perhaps the greatest upset in our political history after the 1948 victory of President Harry Truman over Governor Tom Dewey. The 2016 election, for me, essentially disproved virtually everything that I had learned about American politics. And the Trump campaign was a natural phenomena which eschewed all of the traditional tools of campaigning. Donald Trump was elected president without benefit of sophisticated polling and survey research, without benefit of sophisticated focus groups, without sophisticated analytics for voter targeting, without massive multi-million-dollar paid broadcast advertising. All of the things that I had been trained to believe were essential in a presidential campaign for victory were done without, to surprising success. Donald Trump is very, very much his own man. There is no Karl Rove in Trumpland. There is no one putting words in his mouth, ideas in his head, tweets in his Twitter feed. He prides himself on very much marching to his own drummer. In a strange way, this authenticity, this fact that he was not a cookie cutter, a blow-dried career politician, he hadn't come up through the chairs, he didn't owe anybody, his campaign was not financed by any particular special interest. In fact, by and large, his campaign wasn't financed at all. He spent roughly $275 million. Hillary Clinton, his well-heeled and more experienced opponent, certainly when it came to campaigns, spent somewhere in excess of $2 billion. Yet he won an astounding victory. The reason for this, I believe, is because of a fundamental unhappiness, a discontent among American voters that was more profound and more widespread than anything I had seen in 30 years of looking at political voter polling. Voters had become disillusioned, and I think correctly so, with both major parties. They blamed the elite of both the Republican and Democratic Party, the two-party duopoly in Washington, for a record that included 30 years of American decline. Endless foreign wars where our inherent national interest was never clear. Erosion of our civil liberties, the reading of our emails, the surveilling of our phone calls, our text messages, a metadata collection program on Americans that General Clapper, the NSA director, denied even existed until Edward Snowden proved he was a liar. Massive debt and spending and borrowing that my grandson, Nicholas Stevens, with us here tonight, his children will end up paying for. Immigration policies that cheat the people who are waiting in line in the system to become American citizens and seem to reward those who refuse to wait in line or in the country illegally, and in some cases make our neighborhoods and streets unsafe. Trade policies that the Bushes and the Clintons both promised us would be the economic panacea, but in fact sucked the jobs out of middle America. A stagnant economy where growth in the Obama years was there but was anemic. This created the perfect storm for an outsider, somebody not viewed as beholden to the special interests, not connected to the mistakes and the policies of the past, someone who had no investment in the broken system, nothing to hide, nothing to cover up, nothing to justify, nothing to rationalize. Now, the great asset that Donald Trump brought to this race, other than the fact that he is a man of enormous courage who will say exactly what he thinks, chips fall where they may, was the fact that he was universally known. 15 seasons in a network television show, The Apprentice, had burnished his imagery for the public in a way that made him even more formidable in 2016 than he had been in, say, 2000. He was literally the best known business person on the face of the planet. And if you think about his imagery in that Apprentice television show, he's perfectly lit. He's perfectly coiffed. He's perfectly made up. The lighting is ideal. He's in the top of the high-back chair, seeming decisive, looking presidential, looking like an executive. Now, elites, of course, say, well, that's reality TV, but voters see it just as television. And in fact, the understanding that our pop culture deeply affects our politics, and that in fact, politics is just show business for ugly people, it is a manifestation of the fact that you could now get elected as a presidential candidate without a career in politics. This is why the idea of Oprah Winfrey as a candidate is not a far-fetched idea. She is well known and well liked in the United States by many. She would be, if she chose to run, a viable candidate. No longer does one have to be the governor of New York or the governor of Virginia or a veteran United States senator. In fact, those things may be a negative in the effort to become president. Now, whether the rules have changed and everything that I thought was true is out the window forever, or whether this is a one-time phenomena that is only applicable to Donald Trump, well, that remains to be seen. Now, since his shocking election, the two-party duopoly, the political establishment, the elites, have sought to undo what they could not do at the ballot box. First, there was an effort to undermine his election in the Electoral College. John Podesta, the chairman of the Clinton campaign, suggested that electors needed to be briefed on the Trump campaign's collusion with the Russian state before they voted. Well, that would have been the shortest briefing in American history, because the Russian collusion claim is a delusion. It's a canard. It's a fairy tale. It's a falsehood. It's an excuse. Oh, there was a presidential candidate from one of the major parties in bed with the oligarchs around Vladimir Putin. There was a candidate whose top aides were paid millions of dollars, but that candidate would be Hillary Clinton. And John and Tony Podesta's involvement in the uranium deal, the gas deal, the banking deal, made them millions of dollars. All of this was made public in the Panama Papers in January of 2016 and was well known. So what better way to distract from your own involvement with the Russians than to point at the other guy and say, oh, look over there, Donald Trump. Well, few of us can forget the reset under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, an abysmal failure in terms of our dealings with the Soviets. Few can forget Barack Obama being caught on a hot mic saying to Putin, after the election, I'll have greater flexibility in what I can do. In fact, I believe that Hillary Clinton had promised the savants of the intelligence community and the defense community an expansion of the proxy war in Syria. Syria, where our inherent interests are just not clear. Assad is a tyrant and a dictator. He finances Hamas and Hezbollah. He's propped up by the Russians, no friends of ours there. And on the other side, you have ISIS and 100 other sect terrorist organizations propped up by the Saudis, who are busy fighting legislation in Washington, holding them responsible for their involvement in the attacks of 9/11. Is this worth a drop of American blood? Is this worth a borrowed American dollar? Well, Donald Trump thought not. And that, I think, explains the deep-seated animus, the enmity towards Donald Trump by the intelligence community and the defense community in the United States, what Dwight Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, what today we call the deep state. How can it be that Robert Gates was the defense secretary for Republican George Bush and then Democrat Barack Obama. How can it be that Barack Obama promised us that Guantanamo would be closed, but it's still open? How can it be, sadly, that the United States still has troops in Afghanistan and in Syria, when Donald Trump himself promised us that we were winding down our involvement? This is the legacy of the two-party duopoly and the neocons who, in my opinion, have infected our foreign policy, our defense policy for the last 30 years. The Electoral College strategy failed. There was first a request for a recount. Now, I found this amusing because I had written a piece for The Hill, a Capitol Hill newspaper, in which I expressed a concern that computerized voting machines, which are very primitive as far as computers are concerned, are easily hacked and manipulated. And in most cases, they are linked by a central server in the county or city where they're utilized, and the results of those machines are very easily manipulated. And there is some evidence, several studies that I have read, where exit polls after the election compared to the machine results had a very wide, in fact a scientifically impossible swing, impossible to be described as error. And therefore I had a lack of confidence in these machines. I was excoriated by Media Matters for America, a left-wing front group which says a number of things that aren't true, by the Clinton campaign, because I was undermining our democracy in my concerns about these computerized voting machines. They called me a conspiracy theorist. No, I'm a conspiracy realist. I will go where the facts lead me. When Hillary Clinton decided to challenge the results in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, it's a two-stage process. First, you file general objections, and then some period afterwards, usually 10 days to 2 weeks, you must file specific objections as the basis for your request for a recount. The basis for the request of the recount? Well, these computerized voting machines are easily hacked and manipulated. P.S. The results of the recount in those states demonstrated that Donald Trump actually won by a slightly smaller margin than was originally thought on election night. So the appeal to the Electoral College having failed, the appeal for a recount having failed, we now move to the claim of Russian collusion. I have appeared before the House Intelligence Committee for almost 4.5, almost 5 hours, I believe. I went voluntarily. I went without need of a subpoena. I answered all of their questions. I declined none. I pled the fifth for no questions. And I made it very clear that neither I nor anyone I knew associated with the Trump campaign was involved in collusion, coordination, or conspiracy with the Russian state to affect the outcome of the election. There's a high probability that I will be called to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where again I require no subpoena. I'll be happy to show up voluntarily. On the other hand, if they would just read my submitted written under oath testimony to the House Committee, I think I've already answered all of the questions they want to ask me. This is a political proceeding. And what we have learned, what I believe is the case, what I believe is contained in the very controversial Nunes memo, is the shocking fact that a dossier was fabricated, first by Republicans, the hedge fund manager Paul Singer, a supporter of Senator Marco Rubio, a friend of mine, Rubio that is, and then subsidized by Hillary Clinton, the Democratic National Committee, and then ultimately paid for by the Federal Bureau of Investigation that alleged wrongdoing by Donald Trump during a beauty pageant when he was in Moscow, and that false information, that fabricated document, was used as the rationale for a FISA court warrant authorizing the surveillance of the Republican candidate for president in a Democratic election. An egregious abuse of power, an egregious violation of Donald Trump's civil liberties, a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. No probable cause, not a real one, no evidence, no. Use of the state surveillance apparatus, the authority and power of the state to spy on one of the two-party major candidates for president. If I may, I will take some water. Rather makes Watergate look insignificant. Pardon me for that Marco Rubio moment. Now, incredibly, the men that Donald Trump appointed to the head of the CIA and the FBI oppose the release of a memo that will not only exonerate Trump in the question of Russian collusion, but will demonstrate illegal and unconstitutional activities by the FBI and the CIA. Extraordinary. They say it will harm national security because it will expose their methods. Well, if that is the case, we need to know what their methods are because they violate our fundamental constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. Why the president stands by while his appointees perpetrate this cover-up is beyond me. I do think we're going to find out very shortly what is outlined in the memo, and we're going to learn that this entire inquiry is based on a confection, a falsehood, the phony Russian dossier. Some of you may not know that Donald Trump and I are being sued in a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. The allegation by a group called Project for Democracy, an Obama-blessed front organization, is that we worked with the Russians to hack the Democratic National Committee and give that information to WikiLeaks. Not only is that false, but because it is completely false, it's entirely unprovable, and there is no evidence to that effect. I'm not even sure the Democratic National Committee was ever hacked. I don't know that, as some counterintelligence experts now say, the data was most likely downloaded to some kind of portable drive and taken out the back door. Beyond that, however, is the fact that just this past week, or within the last 2 weeks, the president's lawyers have asserted in that proceeding, under oath, that the publication of material by WikiLeaks and the publication of classified documents does not constitute a crime based on the Pentagon Papers case in which the Nixon administration attempted to stop the New York Times from publishing classified information regarding the origins of the war in Vietnam. And therefore, there can be no conspiracy if there is no crime. You can't conspire to commit a crime if there is no crime. The problem with that, of course, is that lawyers for the Trump administration, Mr. Trump's government lawyers, Mr. Pompeo, the director of the CIA, Mr. Sessions, the head of the Justice Department, are arguing that Assange should be extradited to the United States to be charged, yes, for the publication of classified documents. You cannot have it both ways. I do not believe that Assange is a Russian asset. I believe he is a journalist. I do not believe that WikiLeaks is a Russian front. I believe they are a news organization. And I would point out that no one has ever challenged the authenticity of anything they have published. Something that cannot be said for the New York Times or the Washington Post. Further, that when journalists get information from whistleblowers and publish it, that is the role of a free press in an open society. That is their responsibility. Those are constitutionally protected activities. That is what journalists do. And I can tell you, after a 40-year career in American politics, that when the intelligence agencies say they believe something with a high level of confidence, that means they have no evidence and they're full of shit. It means they can't prove their case. It's their assessment. Look for that word. That's our assessment. Don't tell us your assessment. Show us the proof. Where is the proof? They have none. None has come forward in the House investigation. None has come forward in the Senate investigation. And so far as we know, none has come forward in Mr. Mueller's investigation as the special counsel. Now it appears, having gone completely full circle, Mr. Mueller seeks an interview with the President regarding the termination of the FBI director, I would say the corrupt FBI director, Mr. Comey, and the National Security Director, Mr. Flynn. If the President gives Mr. Mueller such an under oath interview, in my opinion, it is a perjury trap, a suicide run. No good lawyer would advise his client to do that. We don't know what case Mr. Mueller seeks to frame, but it is my guess that he seeks to indict the President on the basis of some process crime, perjury, obstruction of justice, when the President has the unilateral constitutional authority to dismiss either of those gentlemen at any time for any reason. This, of course, it would be, because I don't believe a sitting president can be indicted, but it would and could serve as the basis for an impeachment charge in the U.S. House of Representatives. That would be the third attempt to undo the election of Donald Trump and to achieve what could not be achieved at the ballot box. I also think it would fail the partisan nature of Mr. Mueller's investigation having now been stripped bare for everyone to see. I recall very vividly when I worked for Richard Nixon, who was one of the most durable politicians of our time, a man of both enormous accomplishments and enormous flaws, a man who negotiated a strategic arms limitation with the Soviets, a man who opened the door to China, a man who desegregated the American public schools without bloodshed or violence, a man who gave us the desegregation of the trade unions, a man who launched affirmative action to assist African Americans who had been disadvantaged by prejudice and bias and racism, a man who launched the war on cancer, gave us federal revenue sharing so that our tax dollars were funneled back to government at the lowest level, but a man who also launched the ignominious racist war on drugs, perhaps the greatest financial and social failure in American political history, a man who closed the gold window and took us off the gold standard, a man of indelible spirit and persistence. And yes, it's true, I have a tattoo of Richard Nixon on my back. It's about the size of a grapefruit, equidistant between my shoulder blades. You could say I'm the only guy you know with a dick on the front and the back. It is not an ideological statement. It's not even a political statement. For me, it's a reminder every day that in life, when things don't go your way, when you get knocked down, when you suffer personal defeats and setbacks, when you are disillusioned, when you're disappointed, you have an obligation to get yourself up and get back in the game. It was Nixon who famously told me, "A man is not finished when he is defeated. He is only finished when he quits." Ladies and gentlemen, I will never quit. It is extraordinary then that we come to this moment. The president gave a State of the Union address that I was very pleased with. The economic results of his policies are already manifesting themselves. 2 million new jobs, pardon me, African American and Hispanic unemployment at the lowest time ever in American history. Giant corporations like Apple, hardly Trump supporters, moving back to the United States, repatriating $250 million, committing to expend another $350 million for expansion in the United States. Companies like Ford and others. No, clearly we are ready to do a new trade deal with the United Kingdom, a new trade deal with all of our trade partners, because Donald Trump understands that the only good trade deal is one that is mutually beneficial, one that is good for both of our countries. Now, I believe that Trump's election is more than just the rise of a flamboyant populist and the perfect storm of voters dissatisfied with what they see as a rigged and broken system. I think it is the rejection of globalism. It is the rejection of the surrender of our sovereignty. It is the rejection of these enormous global trade deals. Rather than negotiating one by one with your trading partners, you negotiate one omnibus deal that fits where one size fits all, which has not served us well. I believe the Brexit vote in your country is a reflection in many ways of this exact same trend. And I was disappointed to see the May government in China not closing a better deal with the Chinese for the economic prosperity of your people. And frankly, the sooner the president gets here and makes a deal that's good for us and good for you, well, then the better the future of the United Kingdom. And I find it interesting that those who say that the final results of Brexit will be the economic collapse of your economy, those are the same people who told us the election of Donald Trump would collapse our stock market and destroy our economy. We have had record gains in our stock market and the greatest peacetime expansion in America in the last 20 years, in just 1 year. Yes, I am disappointed that we still have troops in Afghanistan. I am disappointed that we still have troops in Syria. I am very disappointed that Attorney General Jeff Sessions seems hell-bent on enforcing federal law against marijuana when the president told us in his campaign over and over again he supported the states' rights to make their own decision on the legalization of medicinal marijuana. I care about this because my own father, my own grandfather, died horrifically of cancer. They both went through chemotherapy and radiation therapy. I saw them wasting away. I saw their lack of appetite, but more precisely, I saw what the opioids did to them. And then one of my cousins suggested marijuana. And yes, I obtained it for my grandfather, illegally. And he put on weight, and it helped him deal with the pain. And he died a more graceful and merciful death. And I would do it again. So I don't know what Mr. Sessions is up to, but it violates what the president promised the American people in this election. What will happen now? Well, I believe it is possible that Mr. Mueller will bring a charge against the president. I also think it is possible, likely in fact, that he may bring a charge against the president's son-in-law, some process-related charge. Whether those can be sustained or not is yet to be seen. That is the kind of plan B for the elites in our country to reverse the results of the last election. Then there's plan C. You've probably heard some of the seeds of this. The president's mentally unbalanced. He's crazy. We got to get him out of there under the 25th Amendment. I've known him 40 years. He seems no different to me. Is he eccentric? Most definitely. So was Franklin Roosevelt. So was Winston Churchill. So was Abraham Lincoln. So was Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt, what did they say? A lightweight, a braggart, a self-aggrandizer. One of our greatest presidents. These things cannot be judged in the eye of the storm. We will decide at the end of his presidency, whenever that may be, whether he has been successful or not, whether his management style worked or not, but that decision cannot be made today. The results would indicate whatever he's doing seems to be working pretty well. We're experiencing one of the greatest economic booms in our history. And his historic tax cut has not even kicked in yet. And even pessimistic economists admit that it will turbocharge our already growing economy. A 25th Amendment removal of the president, if you don't know, would require a majority of the president's cabinet and the vice president to declare that he is incapable of discharging his duties. He would then have the right to challenge that or put it to a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives, chaired by Paul Ryan. I do not trust Mr. Ryan, but I predict to you that this will be Plan C. And whether it is successful or not remains to be seen. I believe that it can only work if there is a hysteria created about the president's mental state. There would have to be far more evidence than there is today that there is something wrong. I see no evidence of it. Joe Scarborough and Don Lemon of CNN see a lot, but that will be the next refuge of the scoundrels, in my opinion. So people say to me, will the president run for re-election? In American politics, in politics everywhere, I think, a year is a lifetime, a month is a lifetime. We don't know what the issues will be. We don't know what the economic condition of the country will be. We don't know who the Democratic candidate will be. Although I tell you tonight, it is my belief that the Democrats will nominate Michelle Obama for president, that she will be a formidable and very viable candidate. She is an attorney. She is an enormously capable and respected woman. I notice an uptick in her speaking engagements and her engagement on a number of issues. The Obamas are very popular within the base of the Democratic Party in my country, not so the Clintons. In fact, I like to say the only person happier about the defeat of Hillary Clinton than me would be Michelle and Barack Obama. It's just too early to say what our politics will hold. In fact, those who say, oh, the Republicans will lose the House in 2018, setting the stage for impeachment, maybe, but maybe not. You can't handicap an election 11 months in advance. If the Democrats are running on impeachment and we are running on job creation and prosperity, I would predict to you that we will win the off-year elections. They say, well, the party in power always loses off-year elections. They also said you could never be president unless you'd been vice president. They also said you could never get elected president unless you had taken a poll. So the rules are changing. They're changing because of the changes in the way we communicate. And here I want to make my final point. 2016 marks the end of the monopoly that was held by the mainstream media on political dissertation in the United States. Gone are the days when 3 television networks and 2 cable news networks that come slightly later have a complete monopoly on the political narrative. If they don't cover something, it didn't happen. The fact that technological advances mean that now more than half the people get their information through the internet, through their handheld device or their PC or their iPad, and that you have to go through the internet to even watch television, means that an entire new world opens up to people and has meant the rise of a vibrant, robust alternative media, left, right, and center. This is a healthy thing for our democracy. So what is the answer to the tech left? Censorship. Not debate, as you honor here at the Durham Union Society, but censorship. Not a healthy dialogue, but censorship. Whether it is Milo, whether it is Julian Assange, whether it is Roger Stone. Yes, I have been banned for life at Twitter. Whether it is, some technician spilled Coca-Cola on the keyboard and the president's internet feed was, his Twitter feed was shut down for 11 minutes. No, what their answer is censorship. And to me, that is the danger to our democracy. When we can no longer exchange free ideas, when we can no longer express ourselves. This is why when I appeared on the BBC's morning radio program the other morning and the Guardian said that I was a danger to democracy. No, censorship is a danger to democracy.
Being racist is dangerous.
Then I've been waiting for you. No, not being willing to debate that is a danger to democracy.
I'm willing to debate that.
Good, glad to see you. They seek to put the toothpaste back in the tube. They seek to silence those on which they disagree. I doubt that the free market will allow this in the end. There are First Amendment implications. There are antitrust implications. There are service contract implications. Let everyone be heard, regardless of how radical or extreme their views may be. That is the marketplace of ideas. That is the mark of a vibrant democracy. I am delighted to be with you. I am happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Raise your hands and please state your name and your college, and you'll be invited back to the reading room. I will. You pick who you want. I'll delegate it to you.
All right. Let's see. This gentleman over here.
David Bannigan, Van Miller College. I wanted to ask what you thought of Steve Bannon and the recent things he said about Trump acting during his campaign in office.
They're surprising to me. I know Mr. Bannon. I have been publicly critical of him. In my things I have written and said, Mr. Bannon is what I call an enthusiast. He has no particular political experience. To my knowledge, he has never elected any man or woman to political office. I don't know about his level of sophistication in understanding polling and targeting analytics and the use of mass-based advertising. But when you are elevated to the highest possible office or the highest possible position of responsibility, you owe your discretion at a minimum and your loyalty to the person who was elected, because no one elected Mr. Bannon. Now, in Donald Trump's world, just calling yourself chief strategist is painting a target on your back, because in truth, the chief strategist of Donald Trump's campaign is Donald Trump. And the agenda on which he was elected, trade issues, immigration issues, economic issues, were determined a good year and a half before Mr. Bannon showed up with his bag. Nobody gave those to the president. If you went back and looked at the speech he gave in 1988, when I arranged for him to speak in New Hampshire, when I was pushing him to run for president the first time, he was talking about trade imbalances and the unfairness of our NATO partners not paying their fair share. He's been extraordinarily consistent in many of the thematic views that got him elected. So the idea that Mr. Bannon would be indiscreet, even if he held those views, the idea that he would talk to a reporter who had a reputation among many reporters, mainstream media reporters, as a fabricator, as someone who was fast and loose with the truth, well, I think you can chalk this up to hubris. I don't think he will be back as a force. The the selection of Judge Moore in Alabama is something that I lay at his feet. A candidate who I would have had a hard time voting for after seeing his views and hearing his views. The initial round in Alabama had 4 candidates, not 2. And there was a better candidate whose views were more aligned with the president, but nobody apprised the president of that, and he thought he had to make a choice between Luther Strange, an epically corrupt incumbent who had been appointed to the Senate by the outgoing Republican governor who was on his way to jail, and a Congressman Mo Brooks, who'd been an outspoken critic of the president. He didn't even know that Judge Moore was running, although that's not where I think he should have gone. There was a 4th candidate, Dr. Randy Brinson, who was an entrepreneur, more of a libertarian Republican like myself, who would have been a better choice. I think that Mr. Bannon should have weighed in. The other thing where I criticize Steve is that although he got into the Trump White House, he never helped anyone else who was for Donald Trump to get there. Not that I wanted a job. I had no interest in public service, having worked in the Nixon administration in the Office of Economic Opportunity. But when he was cornered, he complained that he had no allies. Well, he had not helped anybody else get there, and more precisely, he'd done nothing to stop those like General McMaster or Dina Powell or other neocons who, I guarantee you, did not vote for Donald Trump, don't share his worldview, don't share particularly his anti-interventionist, anti-war views, but Steve would lift a finger for no one else in the personnel process. Someone experienced in politics would understand that personnel